We're going to now continue in our series of the Bible book by book, and we're going to be looking at 1 Samuel today. And Rich is going to speak to us, but before he does, why don't we show the summary video, and then Rich will come and speak to us.
The first book of Samuel was most likely written by the prophet Samuel, recounting the 100 years between 1100 and 1000 BC during the age of Israel's kings. At the end of Israel's chaotic period of judges, God appoints the prophet Samuel to lead the nation back to righteous living. Samuel marks the final judge over Israel. Despite God's continued faithfulness, Israel begs for a king to lead them like the surrounding nations. Though their motives are wrong, God grants their desire by anointing the warrior Saul as king. Saul is initially a faithful king, leading Israel to military success, but in his pride, he blatantly disobeys God. In response to his actions, Saul is told by Samuel that he will be replaced as king. During Saul's decline, God has been raising up a young, insignificant shepherd named David. Through his humble faith, David leads Israel in victory against the Philistines and takes the position of a popular general under King Saul. In jealousy, King Saul hunts David in an attempt to kill him, but God protects David in the wilderness. In the first book of Samuel, we see Saul's pride and disobedience lead to his downfall, while David's humility and trust in God deliver both him and the nation of Israel.
Be with you today. How's everyone doing? Is everyone okay? Good. You enjoying this series so far? Headed through the Bible book by book. Today, we're going to speak to an important issue which I think we all face, and that is the temptation to take control. We have any control freaks in the house? Anyone like? Oh, there's some very honest control freaks. Don't look at anyone in this moment. It's really hard to trust today, like being really serious, isn't it? It is hard to trust. It's hard to trust the media. There's bias everywhere. I don't know if you've listened to much, watched much media these days, but depending on where you look will depend on the version of events you get. And you might have the same story, but you talk to two different people who's gone to two different outlets, and you might as well be reading about or listening or watching about a totally different story. Where is the truth? It's hard to trust political leaders today. There's lots of promises made, but not many promises kept, it sometimes feels like. Maybe it's in relationships. Maybe get a bit closer to home. Maybe if you're really honest, you've had some relationships where people have let you down. And actually now it means that new relationships that you form, whether that's romantic or friendships or whatever that looks like, you're very tempted to just guard your heart. You're tempted to not give anything away because you've been hurt before. Maybe you struggle to let people in. Whatever your trust issues might be, and I think we all have them, I just want to put to you today that becoming a control freak, like trying to micromanage the events and the sequences of our lives, just isn't the best response. We do have a problem, but that really, really isn't the answer. Instead, I want to put to you, it's an easy trap to fall into. Instead, I want to put to you that we need to freshly surrender to God. And really, that is the question, I think, 1 Samuel. It's a big book. We're looking at 30 chapters. We're not going in detail. You'd be glad to know. But if it was to ask a question, if you were to summarize and just look at it, what question does 1 Samuel ask of us today? It would be this. Will we have the humility to trust the timing of God, or will we pridefully take things into our own hands? 1 Samuel actually ends a very dark period in the book of Judges, and it marks the start and the beginning of God's people being ruled by kings. Up until this point, they didn't have one. You might remember the key verse from just a couple of weeks ago in that very light week that I did on Judges. This was the key verse. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. Maybe you think, that sounds like heaven. I like the idea of that. Everyone did as they saw fit. Everyone did as what was right in their own eyes. That sounds pretty good to me. Well, the problem is, and you'll know if you were here a couple of weeks ago, it really didn't go very well for them. And I think we know this from our own lives, that unrestricted freedom, like freedom with no boundaries on it, it might sound good in principle, but ultimately it descends into chaos. it descends into destructive behavior habits often. We don't flourish in a state of independence. We don't flourish in a state of just pure, total autonomy. We actually are made as people in God's image to flourish under healthy servant leadership. And Samuel, who we're going to get to know shortly, he knows this. He knows this really well. So although all the people in Israel think that an earthly king is the answer, they think we want an earthly king like everyone else. That's the way to go. He's really not sure. He knows his limitations. He knows human leadership and the limitations of it. He knows how dangerous power in the wrong hands can be. So he seeks God at the start of this book, and this is God's response. Let's take a look together. This is what God says to Samuel. Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. See, this was the saddest part of their plea for a king, that they actually already had one. They actually had the best king that anyone could ever ask for. They just didn't recognize it. God was their king over them. And just like children at Christmas, they just wanted what everybody else had. They weren't content with what they had. They looked at the surrounding nations and they said, the grass is greener. I want a bit of that. And interestingly, I think surprisingly to us, God gives them what they wanted. That is a surprise, isn't it? I think that's a surprise. He gives them what they wanted. It might surprise us. I think he does this, though, because he cares mostly about the relationship. And I think he knew that if it was just a flat no, that it would lead to bitterness, it would lead to resentment in their hearts. So he gives them what they wanted so that they would ultimately, in their own time, realize it's not what they need. And we're going to come to see today that they didn't just need any king. This was the problem. They needed the right kind of king. They needed a king who would have the humility to, this is where we're going to go, hear and obey. We're going to look a little bit at the life of Samuel. Have the humility to trust God's timing. We're going to see where Saul totally gets this wrong. And ultimately choose faith over fear. And we're going to look at the life of David. So we're going to do 3 very short character studies. And we're going to see what happens when these people get it right and what happens when they get it wrong. If there was a sentence that you would summarize the whole of 1 Samuel with, it would be this: God opposes the proud and exalts the humble. God opposes the proud and exalts the humble. You will see that theme all over this book this morning. And the first person that we see this theme in is actually in the life of Hannah at the very start of the book. And Hannah is the wife of Elkanah, and she was living with a lot of grief, a lot of pain, because she hasn't been able to have children. But interestingly, she keeps her heart soft to God and his promises. And she promises to him that if you would bless me with a child, I will fully dedicate this child to you and your services. And this is what happens. She gives birth to Samuel. And at a terrible time of just terrible leadership amongst the people of Israel, he becomes a prophet that embodies something of the kind of character that God is looking for. He has humility, and he hears and he obeys. So Samuel was Eli, the priest's understudy, and there's this really funny moment where God starts calling to Samuel as a young boy, and he keeps going and waking up Eli. Like 3 times. Like, what do you want? What do you want? He's like, I want nothing. I just want to sleep. What do you want? What do you want? He's like, no. He's like, and eventually Eli realizes there's something going on here. He says, go back. Go back. And the next time you hear this voice, say, your servant is listening. Speak. And it's really interesting because often the point is made, isn't it amazing that God speaks to this young boy? Isn't this like really special? And we make that the point. And I do think that is special, like in and of itself. Because there's no hierarchy, there's no priority order in who God can speak to. It's about being available, it's about listening, it's not about age. All of that's very true. But I think what's more amazing about this little kind of mini story within the bigger story here is that what he does when he hears. Because the news he hears isn't very easy news to pass on. He is given a message to pass on, and it isn't easy. It's actually a judgment against the house of Eli. Because Eli had failed to restrain his son's wickedness. They were robbing God, ultimately. They were taking the best portions of the meat from the sacrifice, and they were also sleeping with the women who were serving at the entrance of the temple. So like as a priest, you don't have to go too far to realize that is not your job. That is not what you're meant to be doing. And here's the thing. Eli was in authority over Samuel. The temptation for Samuel to keep this message to himself, I think, must have been great. Just put yourself in his shoes for a moment. Just imagine like having to pass that on to your boss ultimately, or what that looks like. The temptation to soften the blow, but he doesn't. He steps up and he speaks truth to power in that moment. He's fully obedient. So I'll pause there for a second. Here's a little test for your heart. Here's a little obedience test for your heart. Where are we tempted to slip into half-hearted obedience and call it full? Where are we tempted to slip into half-hearted obedience and call it full? It's so tempting to try and control how we obey. It's really almost easy to end up defining obedience, not based on what God says, but based on what we're already maybe willing to do. That's what we call obedience. We say that's what it looks like, not on what he's asking us to do, but what we're actually ultimately willing to do. Paul in the New Testament talks about this subtle temptation, about how people in the future will have itching ears. Okay, point to your ears for me. Itching ears, okay? And what it means is they will seek out perspectives that agree with them already. And they will change the standards of God. It's like desire-driven doctrine they will succumb to. We have to be so careful. This guy here is a guy called, next slide, John Lennox. Some of you will know him. He's just a wonderful apologist. He's one of the kind of leading apologists in the UK. He recently was on a podcast with Stephen Bartlett, Diary's CEO, and he said this. It was really fascinating. Stephen was quizzing him on Christianity, and he was trying to get to the heart of, like, why do you really believe? Could you be wrong? All of this. And he says, well, I've interrogated my belief system my whole life. He said, you're interrogating me about it now, but why do you think I'm here? He's like, I'm 80 years old. I'm twice your age. I've interrogated this my whole life, and that's why I'm so confident in it. And then he gets this question back to Stephen. He says, you've got to be careful of this. He said, the easiest person to deceive in your life is who? It's you. You're the easiest person to deceive in your life. Where are we tempted to slip into half-hearted obedience and call it full? I think we have lots of obedience tests in our life. You'll bump up against them many times. I've shared this story before, but I'll share it again. I lived in Manchester when I was about 20 years old. It was a pretty difficult area. It was kind of riddled with lots of like drug problems, crime problems, lots of joyriding, kind of you name it, it was going on. And the reason I moved there is because there was a church that were trying to do something different there. They were trying to help meet some of the needs of the community. And it was a brilliant, really formative time. But the problem was, it was costing me. It was costing me quite a lot. It's costing me quite a lot in car insurance. Because when you live in an area like that, what you'll realize is people steal cars. So your premiums are really high. So I thought, okay, I'm here doing this good stuff for God, right? I'm serving him. So I'll be a bit clever. I'll insure my car at a different address, right? Because after all, I've still got some mail going to my parents' house in the suburbs. I can still do that. If there's mail going there and I'm going there every now and again, it's parked there every now and again. Like, what's the big deal? What's the problem? What's the harm? It cut my premium in half. I thought, 1, 2, 3, well done me. But in reality, what was going on? What was going on under the surface? What was I trying to convince myself on? Well, the reality was it was a lie, and it was a lie that was based in the mistrust of God. Because ultimately what was under all of it was I wasn't trusting God for my provision, my financial provision. I was taking my financial provision into my own hands. I was getting a bit clever with it, getting a bit crafty with it. I had a friend, and he said, look, this might seem like a small thing to you. He said, this might seem like a little white lie, whatever that might be, but if God can't trust you with these small details, how is he going to trust you with bigger responsibilities in the future? You are doing God no favors. He wants full obedience, not half obedience, calling it full. I'm really glad to say that eventually I did change that decision. But where are you facing an obedience test today? Where are you redefining what obedience looks like? Where do you need to maybe humbly hear and obey this morning? Because as we're going to see in our next character, God will not be fooled and God will not be mocked. We need a king who will listen and obey, and who ultimately will have the humility to trust God's timing. The second key character in 1 Samuel is a man named Saul. If you've read the book, you'll know a bit about him. He was the first king, and in many ways, Saul had everything going for him. 1 Samuel 9, verse 2, have a look on the screen. Kish had a son named Saul, as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. He had everything going for him. On the outside, he looked like the obvious choice. He had some pretty early success in his battles, but very quickly things started unraveling for Saul. He gets exposed. And the moment where this happens is in chapter 13. He's on the battlefield. And basically they're waiting to go to battle. And the deal was in those days that you would wait for the priest to come and do the sacrifice. And it was all about an expression of your reliance on God. So before we go fight, we're going to remember that ultimately, God, you're the one who gives us this victory. So we're going to wait. We're going to wait for the priest to come and he'll do the sacrifice. But the problem was they were 7 days in. And the Philistines, their enemy, they were like leaning in. They were like ready to go. And Samuel hadn't arrived yet. And the Philistines are ready to fight. And they're starting to panic. Like the children of Israel are like, what is going on? Like, where is he? Verse 8 and 9, Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings. So what does he do? He gets pragmatic. He thinks if you want a job doing, what do? You do it yourself. And the problem was he oversteps his boundaries. And just as you could imagine, almost in quite comical timing, like just after the moment that he had done the offering, who turns up? Samuel turns up. What have you done? Asked Samuel. What have you done? You've stepped outside your authority. You've violated divine boundaries. Verse 11, Saul replied, well, when I saw the men were scattering, and that you did not come at your set time, and that the Philistines were assembling, verse 12, I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering. Felt compelled. I wonder what compelled him. Now, it's interesting. There's two common responses to this little moment in chapter 13. We'll probably split the room, I would imagine. The first is this. What Saul did, was it really that bad? Like, really? Like, what's wrong with a bit of initiative? I thought we were meant to be initiative takers. Like, what's wrong with that? After all, his disobedience almost seems quite spiritual. If you actually get under the skin of it a little bit, if you think about it, he's just speeding up proceedings, isn't he? But lurking under this spiritual sacrifice actually is a heart of pride. Ultimately, Israel didn't win their battles, did they? Because they were well equipped, because they were strong. We've seen this. I mean, we've been going through these books. Ultimately, they won these battles not because of how great they were, not because of how well equipped they were. They won these battles because God was delivering them in these victories. And a humble Saul in that moment would have held his nerve in the face of fear. But instead, he got fed up of waiting, and he says, I'm just going to take control. Beware, let me just say to you now, just beware of self-serving spirituality. Self-serving spirituality, a type of spirituality which looks good on the outside, maybe it ticks all the boxes, but is actually riddled with mixed motives. When I first arrived at Mosaic 15 years ago, we were doing a mission trip, so we were going to tell some people about the good news of Jesus in The Hague in the Netherlands. Interestingly, where our FPA is right now in the Netherlands, doing a very similar thing. And I was asked to lead this trip. And I remember we had a great time. In fact, Joe Heiliger was there as well. There's some old school Mosaicers. If you're on that trip, just pop your hand up for a moment. Let's just see who. Some of the other gatherings are there as well. Yeah, a few hands. Yeah. Sorry, I digress. I got back, I was like, this has been great, it's been really fun. And I was like, I know what I'll do a social post about it. So I got my phone out, and I was like drafting it, got some nice pictures. And I was like drafting this post about here's what God did, And as I got through it, I just felt this like challenge, this sort of moment, this sort of question. It was almost like, Rich, who's this post for? Like, what's going on here? And in reality, even though I'd worded things, in a certain way, there's a lot of false humility, a lot of pride in that post. And God's just like, is that for you or is that for me? Like, is this a private thing or is this a public thing? And in that moment I knew, I was like, I can't post this. Like, this is ultimately, I made this about me. This is trying to project something. And it might look very spiritual, but actually underneath it was self-serving. And I'm not saying never do a post about a mission trip, by the way. You have to search your heart in the right moments. But in that moment for me, it wasn't the right thing to do. What was lurking underneath was false humility and was pride. Who is this ultimately about? Is this about my glory or is this about you and your reputation? You see, the second response to Saul, though, taking things into his own hands, and some of you might think this, is just how could he be so stupid? Like, isn't it really obvious? Just wait a bit longer. Just wait for God's man. Why don't you do that? Well, I just want to ask, how are you doing in your waiting? It'd be really easy to see that in someone else, but how are you doing in your waiting? Maybe it's in your career, maybe it's in your work, maybe you feel like ultimately you're kind of due a promotion. You've been working harder than other people, you've been grinding away in the background, but actually you're not really getting the recognition that you deserve. Maybe there's a temptation you start to feel to cut some corners, to flatter some of the right people, a few compliments here and there. Maybe even to compromise on some of your convictions to get ahead. Maybe it's pride that whispers in your ear, we need to make this happen. We need to make this happen now. What would humility whisper in your other ear, if you like? I will work faithfully and I will trust God with the outcome. Maybe you're in a season and for you it's about a relationship. Maybe actually you're single, you desire to be in a relationship and it feels like there's not very many good options around. Do you submit your relational needs for intimacy to God? Or do you sadly, as so many do, just go your own way with it? Take it into your own hands? Like, God, maybe deep down, like, I know your word's clear. I know you want me ultimately to be with somebody who also loves you. But this is taking too long. This is taking too long. This is too complicated. Time is short. Will you settle for something less than God's best for you? Or will you submit your relational needs to him in that season? Maybe it's in your finances. Man, this can be so tricky because we live at a time where big brands are so good at building like brand loyalty. They're so good. There's psychologists who are just doing everything they can working for these companies to convince you that you need what they have and you need it right now. So maybe we go, okay, I'll kind of get now, pay later. Maybe there's a temptation to get into debt. Maybe it's driven even by what you might feel like is a healthy thing. It's like, oh, I want to serve my kids. I want my kids to kind of not miss out on opportunities, And before you know it, you overextend yourself. Will we have the humility to trust God's timing with these things? Saul didn't. Saul didn't at all. And from that moment on, Samuel declares that your kingdom will not endure. There is another who is going to come. Verse 14, the Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler over his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command. Who will that man be? They need a king who will listen and obey. They need a king who will have the humility to trust God's timing. And finally, we see they need a king who will choose faith over fear. Faith in the face of fear. Which brings me on to probably the most famous story in 1 Samuel, and probably the most famous story maybe even in the whole of the Old Testament. Because where Saul failed, we see David steps up, and David is the chosen king who succeeds. And the story is in 1 Samuel 17, but let me quickly set the scene for you. There's got battle lines drawn. You've got the Philistines on top of one mountain over here, and you've got the Israelites on top of the other. And the Philistines have this very fierce warrior, Goliath. You know the story. And he's taunting God's people. He's saying, let's have a man-to-man battle, and winner takes all. So whoever wins this fight, the other nation will have to be their slaves. And let's just contrast two reactions for a moment. Let's look at Saul's reaction. Let's look at David's reaction. So here's Saul's reaction. Verse 11, on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now, on the one hand, you might go, not surprising, like understandable. Like Goliath is this fierce warrior. But the tragedy is, Saul at the time, he's thinking in human terms alone. He doesn't consider God's power. He doesn't consider God's strength for all, does he? And it's onto this scene that David arrives. And, it seems like the true underdog story, which is why our culture has fallen in love with this story. Because he's not a warrior, he's not even in the army, he's just a shepherd boy, and he's on a mission to deliver bread and cheese. Okay? That's what he's doing. This is like Domino's pizza delivery boy showing up in the very middle of a battle. But just look at his response in comparison to Saul's. This is his response. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Where does David get this courage from? Well, maybe you think it's just natural, baked into his personality. I don't think so. You see, it's quite cool. We've got a little book. We've got a little insight into David's worship and prayer life. It's called the Psalms, and churches have kind of drawn on it for thousands of years. And this is what was going on in David's heart. Psalm 56, this is what he says. When I am afraid, I put my trust in you. See, he doesn't say I'm never afraid. He says, when I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. And then he tells us where he directs his fear. Verse 4, in God, whose word I praise, in God I trust, and I am not afraid. What can mere mortals do to me? So often our equation, I think, looks a little bit like this. How much bigger is this? Insert the situation for yourself. Fear, opposition, challenge, whatever it is going on right now. How much bigger is this than me? Whereas David's equation was different. How much bigger is God than Goliath? How much bigger is God than the challenge that's right in front of me? David's not looking at Goliath. That's why he's so confident, this young boy. He's looking at God. If you're currently prone to fear this morning, which is very understandable, there are so many situations in our life which can cause us to fear. Financial worries, health of loved ones, just uncertainty about the future. It's very real. I get it. It's a very natural response. We are finite. We feel those things. Those things don't surprise God. And I'm not here to stand up and belittle those things in any way. But we have an opportunity this morning, and even as we respond in a few moments, to do what David did and to redirect those fears and to place them onto the living God, the God who's powerful and who promises to give us strength. See, David, in many ways, he was the best king in Israel. But you're going to see in a couple of weeks' time, he was far, far from perfect. But the problem is a lot of our preachers on Old Testament sometimes, or they can tend to end up landing there. Look at this hero. Look at what he's done. Let's go and do likewise. And it's not that I don't want us to embody some of the things we've looked at, like humility and obedience, really important. Humility to trust God's timing. I want us to choose faith over fear. But you need to know this morning that, and especially if you're not a Christian, that Christianity isn't about striving to do those things really, really well. It's about receiving the affection of the one who did all of those things perfectly on your behalf. It's really, really important. David is actually, he's a type of Christ, which means that in his life, you're meant to see some foreshadows of somebody else, okay? If you keep reading your Bible, you go from 1 Samuel, you go all the way to the New Testament, you're going to see exactly who he is foreshadowing. Because it all points to a greater story. See, what was interesting is that who won the battle? Well, actually, David beat Goliath. Let me ask you a question. What did Israel do? What did everybody else do? Well, ultimately, they watched, didn't they? This was 1v1. David beat Goliath, and they celebrated, and they received his victory. And it's just as they received the victory in that moment, actually, there is a greater battle that is fought 2,000 years later at the cross. And ultimately, we don't do that much. We don't do anything. We receive Jesus' victory. He's the one who faces the greatest fear, not a Goliath, but ultimately sin, death, and the devil. Think of just the worst things in this world coming at you full force. He faces those things straight on, and we get to stand here and receive all that he has done for us. Just as the Israelites are saved and delivered, he delivers us and we receive the reward. So as we come to worship in a few moments, I just want to ask you, let's humbly hear and obey. Let's trust God's timing. Let's choose faith over fear. But really, ultimately, let's come now to worship the one who won the battle for us on our behalf. Let's respond to him and give him all the worship that he's due. Will you stand with me? You might want to close your eyes as the band come back to join us. Jesus, we fix our eyes on you in these moments. Thank you, Lord, that we see you in these stories. Thank you, Lord, that your word tells one big coherent story. Lord, and we love seeing you in the lives of these Old Testament characters. But ultimately, Lord, would you draw near to us now? Lord, would you place your finger on the things that you're wanting to challenge, convict? Lord, where you're wanting to bring us forwards? And would you draw near in places of difficulty, where we're fighting to trust you in these moments? We're fighting to wait well, to not rush ahead, to not be prideful, but to continue to submit and step into humility. Lord, would you draw alongside us? Fill us with your Spirit. Remind us that with you, all things are possible. You promise to give us the strength every day. So we worship you now in your powerful name.